everyone, and welcome back to another video. So, as many of you may know, Kristen and Bethany of Girl Defined Ministries.
It's Kristen and Bethany here with Girl Defined Ministries.
Have written many a book together in their relatively short lives. Seriously, they've written a lot of books. In a previous video series, I reviewed their first book, self-titled Girl Defined, and we went through it in several parts and discussed it. That book, of course, was full of internalized misogyny, anti-feminist statements, a large dollop of homophobia and transphobia, and of course some nice girly chat about how much makeup is too much, really. And oh my god, do you remember that time we were like totally models? Yeah. But today we're starting a new series in which we dive into their second book titled Love Defined, embracing God's vision for lasting love and satisfying relationships. So, before I read this book, I jotted down some predictions for what I thought it would be based on how the last one turned out. And I said, I imagine this will be much the same as the last one, but with slightly less of a focus on, you're not a real woman unless you're like us. Trans women, gay women, asexual women, child-free women, and infertile women, none of you count as real. I thought there would be less of a focus on that and more of a focus on, and here's what real men want and how you can give it to them, because ultimately all that matters is men's happiness. But I guess we'll see as we go on with this series. But before we dive into this book and get into the juicy bits and start tearing it apart, Kyra has a small video clip she wants me to play. Enjoy. Hey everyone, Lady Kyra here. Yeah, you heard that right. I'm a fancy lady now, and you could be too if you want to be as fancy as me. Look at this life of luxury I'm leading. I don't even drink from bowls anymore. Here's my fancy wine glass, because I'm a fancy girl. So, Mum's been working with established titles who allow you to buy at least 1 square foot of land in Scotland for yourself, or as a gift for someone special in your life, and in her case, she got it for her favourite person in the world, me. As is custom in Scotland, when you own land there, you're officially a laird, which makes me Lady Kyra, and you too can be a lord or lady officially if you want. I mean, there's good stuff for other people too, I guess. Like, the land you buy in Scotland is woodland, and you're helping to preserve and protect it. And for every order, they plant this tree with the help of charities like One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future. And I guess that... Wait. You know what that means, right? More trees. And trees make sticks. And that means more sticks. I am so on board with this. This is the best thing ever. And look at my fancy certificate with its unique plot number that tells me which bit of land I am a lady of, which is pretty fancy, right? So, if you'd like to become a lord or lady like me, then there's a big sale on at the moment at establishedtitles.com/LadyOates, and if you use the code LadyOates, that's my name, you can get an extra 10% off, and I'll tell Mum to leave a link in the video description if you want to check it out. But only if you or someone you know is as fancy as me. Look at me. I'm a fancy lady. So there you go. But in all seriousness, thank you so much to Established Titles for sponsoring this video. Working with companies like them, which are really, really great, not only does it do good in the world and help the environment, but also helps me keep creating content that hopefully helps and educates and entertains people. So really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Now, onto the book. I was considering doing like a little snarky bit here about like, well, who are Kristen and Bethany really to be writing about relationships? Bethany was single when she wrote this, and we all know how Kristen talks about her husband.
I remember when you were walking down the aisle to Zach and you whispered over to me and you were like, I'm not attracted to him, but I'm going for it.
Here I go. But then I was like, pot, kettle, really? Like, I'm a woman who's single by choice herself, and I don't necessarily think you need to be in this, like, perfect, happy, functional relationship yourself to talk about relationships. I think that sometimes having all these different alternating perspectives all kind of chiming in on one topic is really, really important and helpful, so I'm not going to be too snarky towards them in that respect. I do think, and it's going to sound controversial, I do think they mean well when it comes to writing this book, and I do think they actually have some good ideas in this. I just think a lot of the time their reasons for those ideas, their understanding of those ideas, and their solutions for those ideas are wrong. But we'll get to all that in a minute. As always, this book is full of lots of their personal anecdotes, and I'm really trying to separate criticising the person from criticising the ideas. And this is something I talk about a lot on my channel, and something that sometimes I forget to do myself, but I think it's really important to keep reminding ourselves Criticize the ideas and not the people. Just because someone has a bad idea or a bad take doesn't mean they're ultimately a bad person, and it doesn't mean they can't be educated and have their mind changed, and it doesn't mean we should just damn them to hell because we don't like what they've said, even when it's a bit of a pattern like it is with Girl Defined. I think ultimately, as long as we stick to criticizing their ideas and not necessarily like the core of who they are, then I think we can have a productive conversation around this stuff. At least that's what I'm aiming for, that's what I'm going to try and stick with, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So, I'm going to split my videos in this series according to the parts in the book and make one video per part, as I did with the last book, each part being around 3 to 4 chapters long, which lets us dive deeply into each section, but not get too overwhelmed either. Today we're starting with part 1, titled Happily Ever Disaster. And to be completely blunt, this first part of the book is like 80% filler, with them just rambling about, and then I had a crush on this guy and it didn't work out, and then I had a crush on this guy and it didn't work out, and then Bethany got a crush on this guy and it didn't work out, and then Kristen, got another crush on this guy and it didn't work out. Oh, and then our friend got a crush on this guy and it didn't work out. And that's most of this first part of the book, so do with that what you will. Chapter 1 is titled, Love, You Are Oh So Complicated, and it opens with Kristen telling us about her wedding day. This is more just like a teaser for what's to come, because it's never mentioned again in this opening section of the book in the first few chapters, other than this little bit. The clock read 4:21 p.m. In exactly 9 minutes, my life would change forever. This was the day I, Kristen, had dreamed of for 24 years. So, straight away, I can't relate. I feel completely out of my depth here on a personal level, because is this really a thing that people do, especially women, but is this really a thing people do where they fantasize so much about their wedding day for their entire lives? Like, I genuinely thought this was just some stupid cliche from a bad rom-com, but it turns out people like Kristen actually do this. But I don't know, it just seems to me, and maybe you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, it seems unhealthy to have so much of a fixation on a wedding. Not the marriage, the wedding. It feels like their entire life has been leading up to a wedding and nothing more. And they kind of feel like once they've reached the wedding, that's it. They've won, they've achieved their goal. But then what about everything that comes after? Does that just not count? Do they just expect to sail through that? Apparently so, if the rest of this book is anything to go by. It seems to me that for a long, long time, and right up to the point when Kristen here was getting married, both Kristen and Bethany thought that, or rather they focused their attention on the wedding and not the marriage. The wedding and not the partner. The wedding and not the relationship as a whole. It seems like they just wanted a wedding, they didn't necessarily want to be married. And if you spend so long fantasizing about a wedding and a dress and a party and all this stuff, then how do you really know you're getting married for the right reasons to the right person? Just kind of screams unhealthy to me. And there are so many other little things in this first part of the book that scream skewed priorities like that. Like Kristen talks about her boyfriend before Zach. Zach's the one she married, and she talks about the boyfriend before that. They'd been dating for 6 months, which is no time at all. Kristen was like 19 or 20 at this point. And we get this little exchange. Look, you're not supposed to know this, but Ryan's been shopping for rings, Bethany said to me in an excited whisper. What? I asked with huge eyes. Seriously? How? I can't tell you anymore, Bethany said. Just make sure your nails are looking good over the next few weeks. I was surprised by this news, but not shocked. Ryan and I had been seriously getting to know each other for about 6 months. Deep in my heart, I truly believed he was the one. So this is what true love feels like. I just find it bizarre that they're talking about a potential marriage proposal and all they're focusing on is rings and nails, not, oh, are you ready for this? Is this the right guy? Have you actually spoken about this and communicated? How do you think your life will look like together? No, it's all, he's buying a ring, make sure your nails look good. Very odd priorities to me. I find it very bizarre. But she tells us why she wanted to marry him, and she says, we shared a lot of common interests. Even though our relationship had endured some rocky patches, we seemed to be pushing forward. He loved Jesus, I loved Jesus. We got along great, we enjoyed each other's company. What else did we need? Oh, Kristen. What else did you need? How about everything else? Do you love him for a start? Does he love you? Do you feel safe and secure with each other? Can you trust each other? Can you communicate well? Do you share core values and goals for the future? You know, basic stuff like that. You'll see throughout this book that Kristen and Bethany absolutely grew up with this certain view and seem to think that every other woman has it too, where they want to get married, or rather they want a wedding, and that's all they want. And this is what I keep saying, they don't really care specifically who they get married to, who's at the end of the aisle at their wedding, they just want the wedding. And this is harmful for so many reasons. And later on in this part of the book, they go on to talk about like, oh, divorce rates are so high, and divorce is bad, and this and this. And this is why you have divorce rates so high, or at least part of the reason. I'm oversimplifying, obviously, but this is part of the reason. When you rush into getting married because you want a wedding, not because you want a relationship and a marriage and a partnership, you know? But Kristen breaks up with this guy, and she goes on to talk about how she dealt with that breakup and why it happened, but never gives any specifics. And again, you'll see this with every story throughout the book, except the ones that aren't specifically about them. You'll notice this. They stay very vague when they talk about their own relationships. The next few days turned out to be some of the hardest in my entire life. My dream world came crashing down before my eyes. Although my relationship with Ryan looked great on the outside, it was covered with red flags. He and I had convinced ourselves we were perfect for each other, but we weren't, not in reality. My infatuation with Ryan had blinded me to the many issues and problems in our relationship. And sadly, Ryan's rough past wasn't as much of his past as it was his present. After a lengthy conversation with my parents, my fears were confirmed. Getting married to Ryan would be an extremely unwise decision. As this realization flooded my mind, I burst into tears. I cried that entire night. I cried that entire next day. Bethany and I even cried together. It was painfully hard. So again, vague. We never find out why it would be a bad idea. We never find out what these red flags are. We never find out what she realized that was so terrible. So there's nothing actually useful in this story. It's just a, oh, look, it was wrong because I say so. And then Bethany tells us an equally vague story of a man called Justin who she loves because he loves Jesus, only to find out, shock, horror, oh no, he doesn't love Jesus at all. Okay, slightly less vague than Kristen's story, but still not great. 1 year after Kristen's breakup with Ryan, I, Bethany, met an amazing guy named Justin. I was falling hard for this guy. The chemistry was instant. He was funny, tall, good-looking, easygoing, and he loved Jesus. What more could a girl want? Oh, Bethany, there's so much more a girl could want. Would you like to see my list? Justin and I met through some mutual friends. His personality was everything I had ever imagined in a future husband. Our growing interest in each other was becoming obvious to everyone around us. Even though Justin was a fairly new Christian, he was anxious to grow in his relationship with God. I loved his passion for theology. I loved his desire to know the Bible. He seemed perfect in every way. The fairy tale movies I'd watched as a little girl were coming to life right before my eyes. This love thing is so easy. Until, of course, it wasn't. Justin told me that he really liked me, but he had come to realise we wouldn't work long term. He explained that his interest in God wasn't as strong as it seemed. He confessed that he didn't genuinely share the same convictions as he had led me to believe. He told me his life would be going in a very different direction from this point on. Oh God, I can feel Bethany's pain. Oh my God. Okay, I'm being snarky, I'm sorry. But I get the point of these stories, and they're trying to be relatable and be like, look, we had heartbreak too, look how hard it was for us. If you want to avoid feeling this sad, do all this stuff we're going to tell you next. I get the point, but honestly, I don't think these stories are half as bad as they're trying to make them out to be. It's really not so bad. I don't want to sound horrible and insensitive. I mean, obviously it's bad, and I feel bad for them being upset and everything, but no one finds the right person immediately. That's just not how life works. Some people do and they're very, very lucky, but most people, you have to look around and meet a few people until you find the right one. For some of us, more than others, there's more than a few people. But even if you go ahead and follow all the advice that Kristen and Bethany give in the rest of this book, you're not going to find the right person immediately. You're not just going to walk up to them on the street and be like, you are right for me. We share all the same values. Let's get married. It's just not going to happen. It's very unlikely. We don't always know who a person is 100% before we start to get feelings for them. So there's always a risk of us getting hurt and getting emotional and being upset when we find out that the person we've fallen for isn't who we thought they were. these things happen and it's a sad part of life, but it's something we have to learn to deal with and work through, not just take as a warning sign that everything is wrong with the world, you know? I don't think these stories exemplify all the horrible things that Kristen and Bethany think they do. Like, Bethany's fallout from this was simply, I cried for 3 weeks, which in the grand scheme of things isn't so bad. And I'm sure she felt sad in that time, and I'm sorry for that, and I sympathise with that. And I wish she wasn't sad for that time, I honestly do. But it's not so bad. We've all been there, and this is kind of on the tame end. And I honestly think, if anything, this story here is an example of this Justin guy being really, really mature and understanding his own needs and what he wants. He had the courage to say, hey, I think we have different values. I think our lives are going in different directions. We should end this now before either of us get any more hurt, because it's not going to work out long term. And while Bethany tries to use this as like a horror story of, oh my god, look how awful dating is, I'm like, hell no. This guy is mature, he's self-aware, he's communicating with her very well. Good job, Justin. Good job. Why aren't more men like that? But like I say, Kristen and Bethany don't see it this way. They draw a very different conclusion. They say, it's pretty clear that modern methods for pursuing romance and relationships aren't working. We need something better, something smarter, something lasting. The two of us are calling time out on the modern game of love and declaring enough is enough. Hollywood, we're calling your bluff. Unless we as Christian women break free from our culture's broken view of love, we will continue to struggle down the same miserable path. At least they do realize that this view of kind of, prioritizing wedding over relationship, at least they realize now that this is harmful. And this is one thing I do have to commend them for, and one thing that I think is a good thing about the book. It points out how harmful that view is, and that is very, very good and very important. However, their new way of seeing things is still very problematic. Even their old way of seeing things is problematic. This entire book has its problems because it is very cis, white, hetero focused. And I don't want to throw this out as a bunch of buzzwords, because they're not bad things at all, but I think when you're writing a guide to love in general, you have to be aware that there's more than one kind of person. This book literally excludes everyone who isn't a straight, white, probably middle or upper class Christian woman who wants kids. Anyone else, you don't count. You're not in this book. Don't be silly. So they never consider gay people. They never consider bi people. They never consider trans or non-binary people. They don't consider child-free people. Not that I found include infertile people. They literally exclude every other person from every other culture and country and basically anything that isn't white America. And they exclude asexual people, polyamorous people, and a whole bunch of other factors and people that I can't sit here and list because this video would be 3 hours long just listing these things that they don't include, or these people that they don't include, or the lifestyles they don't include, or you know what I'm trying to say. So we'll cover this more detail in later parts of the book and therefore in other videos, but I just thought it was worth mentioning. I think that's what I'm gonna title this video series, something about, okay, so do you know Lisa Mitchell's song Clean White Love? Lovely song, really nice. Because of that, I think I'm going to title this Girl Define's Guide to Cis White Love, because that's what this is. Oh, please tell me you know the song. It's a lovely song, very nice. Not at all racist or misogynistic or anything like, oh god, that makes it sound like the song's bad, doesn't it? It's not, it's a good song, nice song, don't worry. It doesn't, oh, words. Let's move on to chapter 2 before I just dig holes any deeper. Chapter 2 is titled Seeing Through the Fairy Tale Facade or Facade. How do I pronounce that word? Facade? 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 So this chapter opens with the story of two friends of Bethany and Kristen who were together for a really, really short time, 3 months when they were kids, and then he breaks up with her because that's what kids do, and then they get back together a few years later as adults and they rush into marriage after just 6 months. So at this point they've been together for a total of 9 months, big chunk of that being when they were kids, and suddenly they're married. It's all very, very rushed, and apparently on the surface it seems like they're perfect. Everyone's like, oh my god, this wonderful couple, they're so good, until he cheats on her. And their whole point of this story is just Bethany saying oh my god, can you totally believe it? Relationships aren't what they seem on the surface. And also a little bit of like, oh my god, can you believe you actually have to be like mature before you get married? I thought that just like totally happened after the wedding. And of course a little bit of like, oh my god, why is there so much divorce? Ew. After Jacob and Caitlin got married, I honestly believed their relationship would work out. I naively assumed their good looks and intense passion would be enough to carry their marriage long term. I assumed Jacob would transform into a mature, faithful, pure, and godly man. I thought Caitlin would instantly become a wise and mature Christian woman. Unfortunately, marriage has a way of exposing sin, not erasing it. I thought marriages were just supposed to work out. I thought young couples as popular and gorgeous as Caitlin and Jacob was somehow above disaster. I thought her good looks would keep a guy no matter what. I thought life would be great for them. I find this very hard to believe that Bethany was the same age as me when she wrote this. She was 29 years old when she wrote this, and it still sounds like a 15-year-old speaking. Oh my god, they were so pretty. Like, how could they not have a healthy marriage? I mean, they're hot, right? That's all they need. Who thinks like that? What adults think like that? That's not normal, I don't think. It's very bizarre. We wish Caitlin's story was a rare exception, but it's not. As the two of us entered our 20s, we quickly realised that most modern relationships were not thriving. Heartache, pain, struggle, and divorce were quickly becoming common realities for those around us. Instead of watching our peers get married and live contented lives, we watch many of their marriages end in divorce. It's no secret that we as modern women live in a relationally broken generation, with the divorce rate pushing the 50% mark. Many of us are experiencing this brokenness firsthand. Recently I, Kristen, had a conversation with a group of single girls. It seemed as though every one of them had experienced something difficult or painful regarding their own romantic relationships. One girl revealed the brokenness she had experienced when her boyfriend unexpectedly broke up with her to chase after a different girl. Another girl shared guilt she'd been feeling since losing her virginity to an ex-boyfriend. Another told of the confusion she was facing as a result of dating a non-Christian co-worker. Disgraceful, I know. Despite the obvious heartache and dysfunction that we as single women experience, romantic relationships don't seem to be improving. In fact, it seems as though they are continuing to become more miserable, painful, and broken. Like a snowball growing bigger as it rolls down a hill, relational devastation seems to be growing bigger with each passing year. It's quite melodramatic, isn't it? But you know what? I don't actually think this is true. I thoroughly disagree with Kristen and Bethany on some of their conclusions here, if not the data itself. So I think there have always been relationship problems and always been people who are unhappy in relationships. I just think now it's something that we talk about a lot more. There's less stigma around it, so we can actually admit when we're hurting and when we're unhappy and when we want to leave a relationship. People, but especially women now, finally have the resources to leave relationships that are unhappy or dangerous for them when they couldn't before. We're no longer left trapped with a man who will beat us or abuse us or just make us unhappy or cheat on us. We don't have to stay with them any longer because our other option is, well, where else would we go? Not that long ago, women weren't even allowed to have their own bank accounts, so how could they safely leave an abusive or unhappy relationship? They simply couldn't. It wasn't done. And that's one of the reasons divorce rates used to be so low, because women and people in general, but mostly women, didn't have any other options. There simply wasn't a way out for them. Divorce rates are higher now, not because there are more unhappy marriages, but because it's safer and easier to leave an unhappy or dangerous relationship. That's all it is. Like, to take another example, people say that now people cheat more than ever, for example, but I don't think that's the case. I think now it's just that, one, we hear about it more, people talk about it more, it's easier to find out when people are cheating and get, catch them out, and it's not covered up as much to save a relationship and save scandal and stuff like that. The stigma around cheating has changed from being on the person who was cheated on to now rightfully shaming the person who cheated instead. And now it's a lot easier to be able to actually talk about these things with your friends and family and people online, people who know you, just talk about it generally, to admit, like, if you've been cheated on, and actually get support and help and kindness from people and not just have it covered up and just be told to live with it, So I'm not sure I agree with Kristen's conclusions here. I think she's missing a lot of variables. In the weeks that followed Jacob and Caitlin's divorce, the two of us realised that we had been living with a false understanding of love. Finally. We naively assumed that somehow couples could thrive on infatuation, sparks, and chemistry for a lifetime. We had unintentionally believed that modern couples could define love according to their own terms and still have lasting results. This false view of love is a direct result of what we call the fairy tale facade or facade. This literally just sounds so, not even just naive, but juvenile to me. You know, this is how young teenagers see love and romance and how kids see it, not actual adults. The fairy tale facade is like a beautiful false front. From the outside, it looks really good. Imagine a temporary front covering on the outside of an old, ugly building. The exterior looks great, but behind the false front is nothing more than a wreck. The fairy tale facade promotes the idea that we can completely ignore God's design for love, sex, and romance and still have lasting, satisfying results. It's the idea that Hollywood can define love according to its own terms and still create happily ever afters. It's the false belief that we can ignore the Creator's perfect plan for our lives and still achieve complete satisfaction apart from his design. Despite all the lofty premises the fairy tale facade offers, it's nothing more than a false front. We clearly see how unrealistic and short-sighted culture-defined love truly is. Bad guys don't simply turn good when they get the girl. Naughty girls don't just turn nice when they get the guy. Adultery isn't cute and sweet. Seduction doesn't bring trust. One-night stands aren't consequence-free. Sex outside of marriage comes with baggage. Divorce has lasting consequences. The list goes on. Despite the way Hollywood continually tries to convince us that true love can be found apart from God, the two of us aren't buying it. We've seen the fairy tale facade leave too many women disillusioned and empty. We're done with the false front. We're done buying into its empty promises. We're done accepting the way it glamorizes sin. We're done sitting back while it tries to hijack God's design. We're calling it out for what it truly is. False. Apparently. So, funnily enough, I actually agree with a lot of what they're saying here. But I would disagree that this is culture-defined love, because that's a very broad term that they never give a specific decision of. They use terms like Hollywood's idea of love, culture-defined love. They don't really say specifically what these things are or what they mean, and they just seem very vague and broad and nothing is defined. When they say culture, what culture are you talking about here? What time and place? Again, everything is white America hetero-focused, so it excludes a hell of a lot of people and cultures and all sorts. That said, I think there's a lot of straw manning going on here. Like, who actually thinks that adultery is cute and sweet? I don't think anyone does. And again, not everything on this list is equal in terms of how bad or serious it is, and how we rank those in terms of badness and seriousness will differ from person to person. So, you know, adultery might be terrible for one person and one night stands not so bad, whereas some people think, well, actually, you know, I can excuse and forgive cheating, but not if they had a one night stand. Like, different people have different standards. Not all these things are equally bad. And again, lots of vague terms that need defining more. What are consequences in this context? And are they aware that consequences aren't always a bad thing? For example, pregnancy can be a consequence of sex. For some people, that's a wonderful thing. For some people, that's a terrible thing. Other terms that need defining. What is a bad guy? What is a naughty girl? What is baggage in this context? This is an issue I've had repeatedly with Girl Defined. They like to list these things and just assume the reader will find them as scandalous as they do, but they never explain why they're supposed to be a problem, why they're supposed to be bad. I think it's really, really important to do so. Like when they complain, oh my god, divorce rates are increasing and high, and I'm like, why is that bad? Why do you think divorce is a bad thing? Why do you think increasing divorce rates is a bad thing? Please explain it to me instead of just saying divorce is a naughty word. Because I'm saying it, this whole thing is bad. And so, because of this, I kind of have these obvious questions that I need to ask Kristen and Bethany that I want some solid answers to, and they never actually give. And now, side note, I have this habit of doing this in a lot of my videos where I want to ask these obvious questions in order to kind of like get to the core of the issue and understand where people are coming from and make sure we all kind of analyze our own views and values and make sure we have reasons for the things we think. Some people don't like me doing this because they assume when I ask one of these obvious questions, I'm leaning towards one direction or the other in my answer, or I'm like implying that I think the opposite or something like that. So, example, a while back now I made a video on Elliot Page and representation in film and media. And one of the things that I brought up was something about, you know, making sure that trans actors have opportunity to play cis roles and also just kind of non-gender defined roles and stuff like that. And then I said, so blah blah blah, with all this in mind, we need to consider, why can't a cis actor play a trans role? And I just kind of left the question out there for people to think about and answer in their own way. And people said, oh my god, I can't believe you're saying that cis actors should be able to play trans roles. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying obviously they can't, so let's think about why. Why is it obvious that they can't? Obviously the answer is complex and comes down to many things, you know. There's obviously major underrepresentation anyway of trans characters in TV and film and media in general, and there's also a lack of trans actors being given mainstream opportunities, so it doesn't seem fair to take some of the only trans roles and stifle trans actors even more by giving them to cis actors that have far more opportunities anyway. There's also issues around making sure characters are accurately represented by people who understand the experiences and motivations of those characters and won't risk turning them into some kind of like cheap caricature, so you need to make sure you're casting the right person in the right role, and all sorts of stuff. So that's what I was looking for in the comments. That's what I wanted to get people thinking of, that and so much more. But instead people took me asking the question to mean, oh my god, so you think this should be the case and whatever, and I was like, no. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. Well, I want to give that example to say this is kind of what I'm saying here. So when I say, hang on a minute, Kristen and Bethany, why is adultery bad? Please don't take that to mean, oh my god, she thinks adultery is great. She supports adultery. She's pro-adultery. Because that's not the case at all. I genuinely ask this because I want Kristen and Bethany, I want my audience, I want myself to think, hang on, why is adultery bad? Obviously it is, but why? I think it's really important to question these like values we have and where they come from, to be able to understand and justify both our own point of view, but also to be able to understand where other people are coming from. So for example, if some people say, you know what, adultery is actually really, really great, I think it's important that we understand their reasons for why that is and how they came to those conclusions, even though we don't agree with them. And that's why I want Kristen and Bethany to be able to tell me why these things are bad, other than just because it is or because the Bible says so. Tell me that adultery is bad because you're breaking trust and boundaries and that's disrespectful to another person. Tell me it's bad because you're putting your partner at risk of STDs. Tell me it's bad because this and this and this and this. Don't just tell me it's bad because it's bad. And so in that same vein, why is divorce bad? Why are consequences good or bad? What are these supposed consequences of a one-night stand, and how do they impact people on a practical level? These are the questions I'm asking them and that I would like answers to. And this is the stuff that they never go deep with. This is the stuff that they never answer. This is the stuff they never consider. And to me, it feels like they haven't really thought it out in detail. And that is a huge flaw in their work. Because to some extent, I agree with some of their claims here. I do think you can't change someone with marriage. You know, you can't go into marriage hoping to change someone. I agree with them on that. I agree with them that adultery isn't cute and sweet, or whatever their words were. I agree with all these things, but, I mean, not all of them, you know what I mean? But I want to know that we agree or disagree on why they're good or bad. I want to know what they mean by these things. I want them to define their terms, and they never do, which is a shame. Without even realising it, the two of us used to believe the lie that Hollywood had the solutions for lasting love and thriving relationships. From the outside, it appeared as though most of the actors and actresses had perfectly functional love lives. It seemed as though they had discovered the secret to true love that average people could not attain. The magazines often portrayed their lives in a perfect light. What were they reading? However, when we dug below the surface, we discovered the portrayal of perfection couldn't have been further from the truth. Some of the most famous actors and actresses had some of the most dysfunctional relationships. Their lives were often the exact opposite of the happy characters they played in movies. They can't have been this naive, right? And also, like I say, what were they consuming to get this impression? If anything, tabloids are always trying to stir up drama and trouble and make relationships seem worse and more messy than they are. So what did they grow up reading? In the light of this reality, we decided to do some in-depth research on a few of the most famous modern celebrities. Unfortunately, the research went quickly and the results were repetitive. Short marriages followed by quick divorces seemed to be the trend among the superstars we researched. In fact, we discovered that the marriages of elite celebrities in our society had an even higher divorce rate than the average person. Despite these celebrities' wealth, beauty, and fame, lasting love seems harder for them to hold on to. Yeah, because functional relationships occur because of compatibility, good communication, shared values and goals, hard work, not because two people have wealth, beauty, and fame. This sounds like a teenager wrote it. But not even teenagers can be that naive, right? And then they go on to quote the Daily Mail. And I think they did this in the last book as well, and I had a lot to say about it then too. I'm not quite sure what to say. Of all the potential sources they could use for anything for their research, they chose the Daily Mail. I'm sure that even regular readers of the Daily Mail, if they were asked to describe the Daily Mail in 1 or 2 words, credible is the last one they would ever choose. Let's move on to chapter 3, the merry-go-round method for modern relationships. So, this chapter opens with Bethany literally proving a point that I have said over and over again, but missing it entirely. You'll see what I mean. A big thing that I say in a lot of my videos over and over is that there's no one rule for anything in life, especially when it comes to relationships, to your identity, to how you choose to live your life, to what you do with your time. You've got to figure out what's right for you, because what might be great for someone else might be terrible for you, and what might be right for you might be terrible for someone else. There's no one right way to do something. You need to figure out what works for you, figure out what you enjoy, what you're good at, what you value, what you need, and then go for that. Don't do so-and-so because so-and-so's doing it and blah, blah, blah. Figure out what's right for you. Simple as that. Bethany tells a story that literally proves this point, particularly in regard to relationships, but it's like an analogy, you know, and yet she still misses it completely. So, to summarise, she tells the story of going to a theme park with Kristen and some friends, and Kristen wants to go on this spinny ride, so a zoomy zoom. So Kristen goes on this ride, she has this amazing time with her friends, and afterwards Bethany says, I watched Kristen and our friends dizzily stumble towards me, panting for breath and laughing. Sounds like they had a great time, right? And because they looked like they had so much fun, they convinced Bethany to go and give it a try next. So Bethany goes on the ride and says, I hated it from the first spin to the very last. I felt sick for the rest of the day. So here you have my point proven. The exact same experience, the exact same ride, the exact same situation was exhilarating and fun and rewarding for one person and hell for the other. It's not the act that's the problem. It's not the ride itself that's the problem. It's not the situation that's the problem. It's who goes on it based on what they want and need and like and enjoy. And that's just the same in life. There's no one right way to date. There's no one right way to have a relationship. There's no one ride that everyone must go on. You've got to figure out which one's right for you and your needs, because you might go on one and love it, and someone else might go on it and hate it. So there you go, point proven. But Bethany misses it completely. Because of course she does. When the two of us look at our culture's method for modern romance, we see a lot of parallels between it and the crazy spinning ride. From the outside, everything looks fun and exciting. The lights are bright, the laughter is loud, and the screams are abundant. Everyone, well, almost everyone, is spinning around having the time of their life, and then the ride stops. The nauseated passengers stumble towards the exit, wondering if the ride was worth it. Our culture's method for relationships has a way of doing the exact same thing. Like the nauseated passengers who go around in circles, we as modern single women hop aboard a similar relationship ride. We spin in repetitive circles and wonder why we reap nauseating results. We stumble out of one romance and into another, hoping for something more, but nothing changes. Confused and disoriented, we continue getting back in line for another crazy ride. So, I can't help but find major flaws in Bethany's argument here, in her analogy, because she's literally saying, the ride looked good from the outside, but I hated it, so now that ride is bad for everyone, and everyone who says they enjoyed it couldn't have really. And it's the same for relationships. I had a bad experience with one kind of relationship, so now that must be bad for everyone else. That is hugely flawed, like on so many levels. Completely dismisses the fact that everyone has different needs and values and things that they want, and different people get different things out of the same experience. The lesson here should be about understanding what you want and what you like and what you need, and going for that, and not being forced into something else just because other people enjoy it, and not, well, I hated it, so everyone else must too, right? And then it all comes back to a favourite argument of Girl Defines, which is basically, stop trying to be happy and do anything for yourself. That's where you're going wrong. The primary goal of the merry-go-round method is rooted in and fueled by a desire to please self. This method is motivated by personal happiness. It isn't driven by a desire to bring God glory, but rather a desire to satisfy ourselves. When personal happiness becomes our greatest pursuit in a romantic relationship, all our decisions will be driven by that motivation. Our focus is on getting what we want when we want it, rather than on glorifying God. So they always say this like it's a bad thing, and I've never understood their reasoning why, even though they have a whole video on it. And they forget that there is another option. It doesn't just have to be live your life for Jesus or live it for yourself. There's no in between. Plenty of people can and do focus on both. And there's also another option where you focus on other people who aren't yourself, but who aren't Jesus. I know, wild, crazy, but it turns out that is an option too. Madness. We're going to unpack the 5-step process of the merry-go-round method for modern relationships. We're going to explore how it works in real life. As you read through the steps, you can see if you relate to any of them. Have you ever unknowingly followed this method and ended up on the crazy merry-go-round? So before I read you an abridged version of their 5 steps, let me say this. I don't know who taught them this, or what they've been watching, or whatever. I don't know where they picked this up from. But the only people I ever see going through this kind of cycle specifically are like 12-year-olds with their first crush. All the stuff they mention is unhealthy, but I also don't think it's the norm like they're claiming. This is the ultimate straw man, and I don't know how to respond, because on the one hand I'm like, yeah, you girls are right. Stuff like ignoring red flags is a bad idea in dating. But on the other, I'm like, but this doesn't seem like the norm. No one's teaching anyone to do this like they're claiming. It's very odd. So let's read and you'll see what I mean. This is how Girl Defined think the average person dates. Step 1. Catch the right guy. Girlfriend, it's time to start hunting. The perfect guy is out there. You just need to catch him. Get out of your comfort zone and get on the hunt. Do whatever it takes to catch the dude who will satisfy you. I hate myself so much right now. According to modern culture, this is the first step towards a lasting romantic relationship. You must first catch the right guy. Until you catch your man, you won't be truly happy. You need to keep your eyes open at all times. So, again, this is one thing I do actually agree with them on. I do think that in many societies today, across many different cultures, there is a lot of pressure, particularly on women, but also on all kinds of people, that they need to have a relationship to be happy and fulfilled. Women need to find a man or they're going to be lonely and sad and whatever. This idea that you can't be happy and fulfilled until you do, and I think that's really, really harmful. Even I see like so many people commenting on my videos saying, look, I normally agree with you, but you have to be honest, there is a rise in single person households. And I'm like, yeah, that's not a bad thing. How is that a bad thing? More people being happier and content staying single, more people choosing to stay single. Tell me how that is a bad thing. Again, it comes back to these obvious questions. Why is that supposedly bad? For me, I see a relationship more like a nice pudding at the end of a fancy meal, you know? I mostly want a good main course. That's what's important to me. That's my work, my house, my dog, my friends. That's my good meal. Once I've got that, wonderful, very happy. And then if I have room at the end of the meal, if I'm still a bit hungry, I'll happily enjoy a dessert too. Love it. Love a good dessert, you know? But if I'm already full, I'm not going to force myself to have one. That's going to be silly. I'm going to make myself feel sick, and I don't want that. It's going to ruin the rest of the meal, isn't it? If I force myself to eat some food I don't have room for. Similarly, if I'm a bit hungry and I think, oh, you know what, I do fancy a pudding today. And then the menu comes and all they have is 7 kinds of rice pudding. God, and I hate rice pudding with a passion. I'm not going to force myself to have pudding just because it's there when I don't like it. I'd rather wait and hold out and go home and have a nice piece of chocolate fudge cake with caramel sauce. Wait, no, that sounds dirtier than I meant it to. I just really like cake. Once you've got your core meal sorted, if you want the pudding, only have it if you've got room for it and it's something that you like and really, really want. Don't force yourself to have an extra course that you can't fit into your meal and that you don't really like. And it's the same with relationships. A relationship should be like the cherry on top of your life. It should fit in there nicely. It should add to your life. It should make it better. You shouldn't just feel the need to have it because everyone else is having one. You shouldn't feel the need to have it just because it's there. You know? It's got to be something that adds to your life. The point is, I do think Girl Defined have a good point here, and this step is something that is often forced on people, especially women, and it shouldn't be. Step 2, coast on infatuation. So by this one, apparently you found a guy you're interested in, and they say, this is next step towards your happily ever after. Let your emotions run wild. Obviously, the chemistry between you and this guy is a clear indication that you're meant to be. It doesn't matter that he's 20 years older than you. It doesn't matter that he's working part-time hours and still living in his parents' basement. It doesn't matter that he's using all his free time to play video games. What's wrong with video games? None of that matters. The only thing that matters is the chemistry between the two of you. Right here, right now. You just need to coast on that infatuation. It will take you to your destiny. It will lead you to your soulmate. Oh, and make sure you ignore the wisdom and advice of those around you. They aren't you. They don't understand the chemistry and sparks happening in your heart. Ignore any cautions or red flags they might bring up. Infatuation must be your compass for navigating your heart. Despite how silly this may sound, it's what modern culture encourages single women to do. We're encouraged to make important romantic decisions while dazed by infatuation. Wisdom and discernment are non-factors when it comes to the life-altering decision of marriage. And this is where I start to disagree, because I don't think this is the case. I don't think this is what women are encouraged to do all that much. More than ever, I think people are being taught to look out for red flags in potential partners and assess their suitability on a whole bunch of factors other than just, do you love them? I agree with them that chemistry and feelings are not enough for a long-term relationship, but I disagree with them that the all you need is love and love perspective is all that normal anymore. I don't think it is. I don't think many people or places or media pushes that anymore. That said, I do think they are right that this is something that we need to continue to talk about, especially to young people, and educate them on this. So surprisingly, I don't think this part of the book is looking too bad so far. Step 3, concentrate on your feelings. Now that the infatuation is set in, it's time to concentrate on your feelings. At this stage in the relationship, your feelings will be your best source of truth. If you feel good about the relationship, continue moving forward. You can determine if you're in love with your man simply by how you feel about him. And then blah blah blah. I feel like this is just a repetition of step 2, so the same thing applies. I'm just going to skip over it for time and to not bore you. And then step 4 is count on him to satisfy you. Not like that. You finally found your dream man. This guy has to be your soulmate. He's the one destined to satisfy all your needs. He's your Prince Charming. He should make you feel like a queen at all times. Your job is simply to count on him to satisfy you. Go ahead and place all your hopes, expectations, and desires on his shoulders. He's your true love. He will make you happy at all times. According to step 4 in the merry-go-round method of modern relationships, a guy's entire purpose is to make his girl's life better. He exists to bring her happiness, to make her feel secure, to meet all her needs, to read her mind and know what she wants without her having to tell him. It's his entire job to satisfy her, and he better do it well. When it comes to modern relationships, single women are taught to view guys as their happiness makers. We don't even realize it, but this step is ingrained in our brains. He better make me happy. He better satisfy me. He better know when to bring me flowers and chocolates. He better know how to cheer me up when I'm frustrated. He better be the most thoughtful man at all times. And then this step is just purely about being selfish at all times. Again, I'm not sure anyone really thinks these things, but I do thoroughly agree that this is a bad way of dating and should be criticized. Dating should be a two-way thing, and as much about what you can do for the other person as that what they can do for you. But I think this argument is a straw man. I think most adults who aren't teenagers or 20-something boys who still haven't grown up and think that women are just sex dolls, I think most adults don't think this way. It's just a very juvenile way of looking at things, isn't it? And it's hard to believe this was written by like a 29 and 30-something-year-old woman. Unless, of course, they are just getting this view of what dating is from all the teenagers they spend time with. Which, I don't know, I guess that makes sense. But again, I don't know. I find it very odd. And then step 5 is cry when it fails and then go back to the beginning and do it all again. If at any point in the merry-go-round method you stop feeling in love with your guy, call it quits. If your infatuation wears off, end it. If your feelings change, look for romance somewhere else. If he doesn't satisfy your every need and meet all your expectations, say goodbye. End the relationship the moment he stops making you completely happy. Apparently, he wasn't your soulmate after all. It will be painful, so go ahead and cry as much as you need to. Sadly, this final step is almost always inevitable. So I know they're being snarky here, but yeah, I do think this is what people should do. To some extent, anyway. You shouldn't be with someone you don't love and who isn't making you happy and who can't fulfill your core needs, and I don't think there's anything wrong with breaking up with someone for those reasons. I think we really need to stop this whole stigma around shaming the end of relationships, because just because something comes to an end, that doesn't mean it was all bad. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Sometimes ending a relationship can be the healthiest thing for all involved. Just because a relationship comes to a natural end, that doesn't mean the relationship was a failure. It just means it stopped being successful anymore, it stopped helping you grow, but it was still good while it lasted. It still taught you stuff, it still helped you grow, it still made you both happy, and you can get something out of that and take something positive away from it. I think this whole idea of like shaming divorce as being a terrible thing, breakups as being a terrible thing, needs to end. Just because a film ends, it doesn't mean it was a bad film. It doesn't mean there was no point in watching any of it just because it ended. Just because you finished a meal and your plate's empty doesn't mean it was a bad meal, and so on. The end of something isn't always bad. It's just the start of the next chapter and something new, and sometimes it can be the best thing for all involved. It's much better to end a relationship that wasn't working than to continue in a harmful one. I think more often we need to celebrate breakups and say, like, you know what? Good on you for getting out of there. Good on you for ending it. Good on you for moving on. I think we need to celebrate these things a lot more. The reason this method produces such bad results is because it's primarily rooted in one thing: self-centeredness. The merry-go-round method is an all-about-me method, my happiness, my fulfillment, my satisfaction, my pleasure, my rules, my way. Oh, sorry, I'm just reading through this bit. And again, I agree with this. It is a very selfless and thoughtless approach, but I don't think it's the normal approach. I'm going to keep saying this, and I don't agree with their solution either, which is, until we as modern women intentionally choose a Christ-centered approach, we will continue spinning in never-ending, nauseating circles. And again, this is where I disagree with them. They don't see that there's another option, which is focusing on other people as well as yourself, and as well as God and Jesus if you're religious as well. You can do all of them at once. It's not just an either or. They miss out a lot of stuff. I do think that the problem with this approach that they've made up, I can keep throwing that out there, is that it focuses too much on, like, what am I feeling this instant, and not what do we need long term. It focuses too much on what is this man doing for me, and not enough on what can me and my partner do for each other, you know? So I do think it's a fundamentally flawed 5 steps that they have here, and they're right to criticize it and call it out, but I also think it is a straw man, and that these 5 steps aren't the norm. So this is what I'm finding increasingly with Girl Defined. They have some good ideas in there, which I know is shocking, but they don't ever bother to understand why we have certain problems, where they come from, why they're bad, or how to actually fix them. And I think that's a big flaw in a lot of their work. And I think this is how they end up coming to a lot of really, really harmful conclusions and spreading a lot of really, really harmful narratives. Like, we've seen this before. Bethany's pure misunderstanding of basic biology, and also basic sociology and anthropology, to be honest, when it comes to the way she talks about, like, what it means to be a woman and a real woman and all this stuff. Like, it's fundamentally flawed. She doesn't understand sex or gender in terms of biology or sociology, and so her arguments are flawed, and she ends up spreading these really harmful, misogynistic and transphobic and often homophobic and many other different, like, terrible, harmful ways. She ends up spreading these really harmful narratives, and we've seen this in her Instagram posts. I called out, I don't know, like a year ago now, something like that, and it gets really, really bad. And I think ultimately it comes down to them not bothering to learn where their values come from, not bothering to assess their own values, not bothering to learn and ask themselves questions and challenge themselves more. And I think that's a big issue. So I understand where they're coming from a lot of the time. I just think it's flawed and thoroughly disagree with it. And we're going to see more of that as the book goes on. So the next part is called Bringing Back True Love, and the next chapter we're going to be looking at is, it sounds very creepy. It's titled From Little Girl Crushes to Big Girl Relationships, but we're going to be looking at that in the next video. So if you'd like to see that, please make sure you subscribe to my channel. I don't just make kind of content like this about sort of like more atheisty topics, but I also do book reviews and poetry analysis and science and history content and lots of social commentary and all sorts of stuff. So it's a big mixed bag. I'm sure you'll find something else that you enjoy on here, at least I really hope you do. But for now, thank you for watching today. Thank you so much to Established Titles for sponsoring this video. Please go check them out and go get yourself a little patch of land in Scotland to help the environment and give someone a really cool gift or title, or just treat yourself. They're really, really great. I will leave their links down in the description below. But for now, thank you so much for watching today. Thank you for taking the time. I hope you're all really well, and I will see you again very, very soon.